Okay, hello to everyone. Today we have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Steve MacFeely, one of the most renowned experts in data and statistical literacy. I became a part of the statistical literacy project back in 2005, and Dr. Steve has been a board member and advisor of ISLP, the International Statistical Literacy Project, for many years. So we've known each other for quite a long time. I'm really happy to have you here today and to hear your great ideas about data and statistical literacy. Is such an important topic for everyone these days, especially with the rise of new technologies, artificial intelligence, and data science. So about Dr. Steve, Dr. Steve has PhD in economic statistics. He is chief statistician at Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and also former director of data and analytics at the World Health Organization, WHO. Also former chief statistician at Untitled, both based in Geneva, Switzerland. And beside of these professional executive activities, he is an adjunct professor at the Center of Policy Studies at University College Cork in Ireland. And he is co-chair of the committee of the chief statisticians of the UN systems and of the committee for the coordination of statistical activities. Chairs the advisory boards of the Statistical Journal of the IOS and of the International Statistical Literacy Project, ISLP, and is a member of the statistical advisory panels to both the UNDP, Human Development Index, and UNCTAD's Productive Capacity Index. He was co-lead on the data strategy of the Secretary General for Action by Everyone, Everywhere 2020-2022, and lead author of the 2020 system-wide roadmap for innovative UN data and statistics. So again, thank you, Steve, for allocating your time to share some insights about data and statistical literacy with us. First of all, I want to start some questions to understand the core of data and statistical literacy. So how would you define data literacy and statistical literacy in your own words? And why is data and statistical literacy increasingly vital in today's data-rich world, especially outside of technical professions? So I invite you to start with saying some hello or something, and with this first question, please.
Well, hello everybody, and thanks Afshin for the very nice introduction and for the invitation. It's a great privilege to speak to you and to your colleagues and students. So statistical literacy, I don't have a formal definition that I can give you, but a couple of years ago, I wrote a paper with some colleagues from Canada trying to tease out what we thought about it. And for me, it's really a combination of the kind of mathematical skills, statistical skills, and then also basic literary skills, and putting those three together. And the reason you need those three things, I think, is to examine data, but to be able to contextualize it, to understand where those data came from, what they mean in the context that you're reading them, because the context is incredibly important, and then be able to do some basic operating functions, you know, to allow you to add them up, to compare them, to contrast them, and those are really important. But allied to the kind of skill set, I also think there's competencies that you need, for me, not necessarily for everybody, but certainly for a statistician, but I would hope for everybody, you need some curiosity, and you definitely need some skepticism. So curiosity, you need to be just curious, you know, why is something happening? you read something, a trend going up, you read about inflation, you naturally want to understand, why is that happening? What's causing that? But you also need to be skeptical. You need to look at that information and think, who provided that information? Why did they provide it? Is that a trustworthy source? If I'm interested, if I want to find out more, have they published methodologies? Have they published metadata, or is it like a black box? If it's a black box, I would be extremely wary of using those data. So if I can't get background information, if I can't see the methodology, instinctively I don't trust those data because I feel like they're hiding something. So for me, statistical literacy or data literacy, I don't really make a distinction. It's the ability to absorb information and make sense of it, put it in context, but also have enough intellectual faculty that I can question those data and I can challenge those data, and if I want, disregard those data.
That's perfect to mention the context and also the application and the trust that is always very important in data and statistics, especially in official statistics. So based on your rich experience in national and international official statistics, and based on what you mentioned by now about the trust and knowing about the source of data, can you give us some examples where misunderstood statistics have led to major misconceptions in the media or policy, or even maybe cause some ethical concerns?
Well, I'll give you a very simple example that's live at the moment. It doesn't pose ethical considerations, but it just causes confusion. And that's around inflation. So I've read a number of months ago, we published a blog at OECD on inflation. And the reason we did that was I was starting to see articles on LinkedIn and on other social media that the battle with inflation was over, and the household's battle with high prices was over because inflation was falling. And this is a common misconception, and it's typical of many, where people see the inflation rate falling and they think it means prices are falling. But in fact, that's not what's happening. A falling inflation rate means that prices are continuing to rise, but at a slower speed than they were before. So this is the difference between a level and the rate of change. So inflation measures the rate of change. It doesn't measure the level. And this is a really common confusion. And you see this all the time where policymakers, journalists, really kind of misunderstanding what the data are saying. So at the moment, or at least until maybe 2 months ago, inflation rates were falling after the very high spike in the pandemic. So during the pandemic, inflation rates went up to about an average of 8 to 10% in the Western world. Over the last couple of years, those inflation rates have been falling. They've started to rise now in the last month or two because of the tariffs, but let's ignore that for the moment. Let's just concentrate on the falling inflation rate. Now, the actual price levels have not fallen. In fact, they've been continuing to increase, but they're now increasing at a slower speed, which is what falling inflation means. But we haven't had deflation, which is where the actual prices fall. So this is a very simple example where if you don't understand what those words mean, and you don't understand the difference between a rate of change and a level, then you get confused, and the way it's presented, it's very easy to misinterpret those statistics and think, oh, this is really strange because the statistics office is saying inflation is coming down. And yet my lived experience in the shop is that I see prices going up. So these guys, they don't know what they're talking about. They're wrong. But in actual fact, that's exactly what they're saying. But the way they're presenting it, or maybe the way it's being picked up in the media, they're not interpreting the statistic correctly. So the fact has been presented correctly, but people misunderstand it, and then they get confused. They contrast it with their life, and they just think, oh, this is nonsense. These guys don't know what they're talking about. So in a way, it's a combination of people not understanding the statistic and maybe also the statistic not being presented clearly enough that helps people to understand it, that contributes to then distrust, where people think, oh, this is nonsense, that there's no way that statistic is right. But it's because they haven't understood it, or we haven't explained it well enough.
Yeah, the inflation is a very good example, as we didn't have it, especially in Europe, for many years. And it was stick to the goal inflation that was close to 2% for many years. So it was a new thing for the people, for most of the people. So the meaning and the concept of inflation was something that the econometry and the people that they are from economic, they know exactly what does it mean. And but for the public and for the citizens, it might not be that much clear, and that is something that we could feel it during the last years that we had the inflation in the economy. So it is like saying some stories with the data and telling people the stories with data and make it clear for them to interpret it in the right way. We had a presentation by Dr. Ruth Jones from the UK. The video is available on our YouTube channel also, about telling us stories with data. I would like to know your thoughts on data narratives. My question is, for example, for disinflation or the concepts that they are important for the public to know about it. In your opinion, what skills are necessary to build accurate data narratives? I mean, how can we effectively integrate descriptive statistics, visualizations like infographics and interactive charts, and narrative techniques to discuss this kind of important concepts?
Well, there's a lot we can do. I mean, I guess the first question is you have to understand a little bit about your audience and how much time that audience has. So if you're writing a newspaper article, you don't have that much space, and the reader isn't going to give it much time. So you need to be very selective about the elements that you want to present. The one thing I would say with inflation is I think we should compare always the level and the rate of change to draw that contrast, because I think that's continually a source of confusion for many people. So I think if you just present the index, you will see that the index is continually rising over time. And that conveys in quite a simple way that the price level is continuing to rise all the time. Whereas the rate of change is the percentage increase or decrease since last year. That doesn't convey the level, it just conveys the rate of change. And I think that's where people get confused. So if it's a newspaper article, I think, stick to the basics. If you're building an interactive tool, and if you're designing something for a user that maybe has more time and has maybe a more exploratory frame of mind, then there's been some nice tools where the UK, for example, had actually built a tool. I forget what it was called, but it was something like, select my basket or build my own personal inflation rate. So what you could do is you could select all the items in the CPI basket that were relevant to you. So, for example, if I'm a single person, I don't have kids, I could delete all the items to do with nappies, to do with childcare, to do with school. And the index would then recalculate itself. And then I would see what an inflation rate looks like for someone maybe of my age who doesn't have kids or isn't married, or maybe doesn't play sports. So I can drop all of the sporting items. So I can tailor the basket oftentimes the idea of that was to show people that the basket is built for an average population. So young people, old people, athletic people, non-athletic people, people with kids, single kids, men, women, you know, and as such, it has to kind of capture a little bit of everything. But of course, none of us are average. I mean, we're all individuals. So when I look at that basket, a lot of stuff in there isn't relevant to me. Maybe I don't eat chocolate. Well, that's not true, but you know, there's things in there. If I delete them, then suddenly the index might start to reflect my reality a bit better than the average index. So building these interactive tools are great ways, especially for school kids or college kids, where they can go in and they can experiment interactively. They can take things out, they can put things back in, or they can change the weights. Because again, the weights, which kind of give the representativity of each individual product, they're built based on national consumption patterns. But of course, maybe my consumption patterns, because I live in a particular region, or because I'm a particular age, maybe my consumption patterns are different. Maybe I eat tons of chocolate, but maybe I'm too young to have a car, so I don't buy petrol, and I don't have to buy car insurance. So those kind of interactive tools, I think they give people space to go in and experiment and play, and then they start to understand something like inflation a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think there's lots of things you can do. I mean, I think visualizations are good, but I would say, I think now with computer technology, they can generate visualizations now that are so sophisticated, but I'm not always convinced that they're helpful in conveying a message. I see a lot of really amazingly, they're really pretty, they're really attractive, but I find myself having to look at it for too long. I'm looking at this chart going like, I don't understand what it's telling me. So for me, there's a kind of like a 3 or 4 second rule. And if I look at a chart, if I don't understand what it's telling me within 3 or 4 seconds, then the chart doesn't work. The other thing I see, which is really unfortunate because it should be avoidable, is using the wrong chart for the wrong information. Time and time again, I see people presenting time series using a histogram or something, or using 3D pie charts. It drives me nuts. So, you know, there's things that people do that it's not the best chart to convey the message that they're trying to convey. So I don't always think the most sophisticated products are the best. I think sometimes simple charts that are well labeled. I mean, all the stuff that you're probably teaching in college, do the basics right. You know, clear information, clear legend, clear access labels, and a simple chart. And if people understand it, then that's good communication.
Yeah, you mentioned very important points about visualization, that nowadays we are using the software to have some charts about the different data. And we have to take care that charts, they should be applied for some specific data sets or the type of the data that we have. So all of them, they play a role to give us enough information that which chart is appropriate for our analysis. And about the CPI or the inflation that you mentioned, the main concepts of the inflation, like the base year, the weights that we consider for each item in the basket, or the basket that is a normal basket for the whole society, for all people that they are living in that economic area, not a specific person. So we can tailor that basket for ourselves to fill it or to see it as a number that makes sense for our situation, not for the whole population of the country. So these are the things that the people should know to have a good understanding of what really inflation means and how it might be different with their expectation from the prices that they are seeing in the market. And that is something that we have to teach, this kind of concept, maybe not only at the universities, but also for the public. So teaching critical concept is also something important. Let's borrow from another presentation about the statistical literacy and data literacy that we uploaded to our channel before with Professor Milo Shields. He's a pioneer, you know him, in teaching statistical literacy in the US. So he calls confounding the elephant in the stats classroom. And, you know, Professor Schill, and I had the chance to work with him in 2010 on the strategic plan of statistical literacy in ISLP. In this video, we heard from Professor Schill that reading, understanding, and interpreting everyday statistics is not only about numbers, but the role of language and action verbs in misinterpretation is also important to be aware of. Do you agree that teaching about confounders is so crucial, and the statistical literacy or data literacy is not just about numbers, but also about words, about language, about how we present it?
No, absolutely. And for two reasons. Let me start with the simpler one, and then I'll come to the more interesting one. You know, action verbs, you know, so if we say inflation, if we go back to the example of inflation, inflation is moderating, inflation is falling, inflation is tumbling. All of those words convey a different sense of what's happening without changing necessarily, depending on how, if I look at the curve, if I look at the angle, depending on my perspective, I could use all of those words. And often this is where ideology comes in. So someone who is feeling defensive, they may want to say that inflation is racing, it's rampant, it's whatever, because they want inflation to be high because they're maybe in the opposition party and they want to accuse the government. The government, on the other hand, will probably be more defensive and will say, inflation is increasing gently, or, you know, so you have to look at the numbers, but you have to look at the language next to it and see, well, is that appropriate? Is that an interpretation? Is it a fair interpretation? And you really have to come to a judgment yourself. And that's the critical thing about statistical literacy. It's trying to empower people to look at the numbers, look at the text and say, well, I don't agree with that interpretation. I actually think that is rampant inflation, or I think it's nothing to worry about, because I'm competent to look at those numbers. And then it means then if I can do that, not only can I reach a judgment about what's going on with inflation, I can also reach a judgment about the people writing about it, and I can see, okay, that they're not presenting a fair and balanced account of what's happening. They're presenting a very skewed or biased presentation. So I need to be wary of that journalist in future, or that political commentator. The other area where words are really important in the context of statistics is what I would call the dual role of statistics. So typically when we think about statistics, we think about the act of measurement. So we're measuring inflation, we're measuring unemployment, we're measuring trade. But to do that, we will have had to develop a series of methodologies, and we will also have had to develop a set of conceptual frameworks and boundaries around what that is. So, for example, to measure inflation, I have to know what inflation means. I have to know what the rules are for measuring inflation. How do I measure inflation? And all of those terms, all of those concepts, whether it's unemployment, at some point in history, they're agreed. And then they're agreed by the Statistical Commission at the UN, and then they become the rules. And then oftentimes people forget about those rules. They just say, okay, that's what unemployment is. But the words that we've used when we develop those standards, those normative standards, and the choices we've made, they shape the narrative thereafter. So if you look at GDP, defense spending is included in GDP. At the time, back in the 1950s, this was a huge argument. It was a very contested issue for a long time. But then people accepted it. The decision at the time was we include defense spending, and then nobody thinks about it again. But if we had decided the opposite, if we had decided that defense spending isn't included, then GDP would be a very different thing. So it's very important when you're using words like unemployment to think about what is unemployment. To work for payment or profit for at least 1 hour. You have to be over 15 years old. There's a whole string of conditions. So it's very important to think about the words that you're using and think about what do they mean, and are they still appropriate today? Are they appropriate for the context? Because I think too often we just take those words on trust and we say unemployment has gone up, and we don't really know what it means other than this thing has gone up or it's gone down, and we don't really engage and think about what is it we're saying.
Yeah, so you know that we are teaching the artificial intelligence, machine learning, the data science, this kind of things. Now I'm teaching this kind of courses at the university. So we always have discussion with our students about the technological advances and teaching innovation. And you are highly experienced expert and professor with extensive experience in various international organizations like UN, WHO, the OECD. I would like to know your opinion on new technologies or tools that help promote data and statistical literacy, and to solve this kind of problems that you already mentioned, to make a common words or language for everyone to understand it better, or to use the AI to interpret it for us in the right way. So we are now at the age of AI, the ChatGPT, this kind of LLMs, the large language models, the small language models, data dynamic dashboards, chatbots. So we also can use this kind of facilities for education. So could you share insights from innovative tools and maybe some projects to improve statistical literacy or data literacy with using this kind of new technologies?
Yeah, so new technologies, I mean, they present a double-edged sword all the time. They present opportunities, suddenly we can do things that we couldn't do before, but all the time we have to try and validate that what they're doing is correct, and it's not always easy to do that. I mean, AI itself is a huge topic, but if we start, for example, with GPT models, we've been doing a lot of work to test them. So far, I have to be honest, we're quite concerned in terms of dissemination, because what we see is a lot of people are starting to use GPT models to replace their search engines. So they're now asking, instead of asking Google, which might have brought you to the statistics office page, now they're just asking GPT, what is the inflation rate or what's the unemployment rate? What we see is that oftentimes GPT, because of the way it computes over a distribution, it doesn't always give the right answer. But very worryingly for us, it gives quite a plausible answer, but it's not actually the right answer. And then secondly, the other concern we have is oftentimes the answer that it produces is wrong, but it will attribute it to OECD, or it will attribute it to World Health Organization or World Bank, when in fact that statistic doesn't belong to us at all. So these are things that we are very worried about at the moment. So we are trying to develop our own GPT type models that hallucinate less, because they're more confined, and they're only using our data, or at least official data only, so that users can still benefit from the power of AI, but in a more confined or controlled environment where it's not just sucking in all sorts of data. The other area that we're using AI quite a lot, and this has been much more successful, is what we call pair programming, which is we have to do a lot of coding, and artificial intelligence can help us to reduce our errors, to improve the efficiency of our coding. And that's called pair programming, and that's quite good. It's quite good too at documenting coding, which has often been a big problem. I'm sure you've inherited other people's code. It's not commented well, and you have to work through the program line by line to try and figure out what the original author was intending to do. So things like that, we found AI is very good for. The type of things that we're experimenting on or starting to think about, one in particular is called balancing, which is when we try and reconcile the supply side and the demand side of the economy. So there's different ways to measure the economy. In theory, when you put them together, they should equal each other, but in practice, they never do, for a whole variety of reasons. So you're usually left with an asymmetry or asymmetries, and that's often quite a difficult process to smooth out those asymmetries. So using artificial intelligence for that type of work is quite promising, and we're pursuing that. And then, of course, the other big area where it does appear to be useful is searchability. Just turning semantic text into a proper structured query and helping people to find the answer that they want. So again, there's some interesting projects underway. The IMF have developed a product, I think called Stats Chat, which you can ask it a question, like a methodological question, and it will give you the answer, but it will also give you the references. It will tell you where that answer was sourced from. So if it comes from the National Accounts Manual, if it comes from the Balance Payments Manual, it will tell you what paragraph number, what page number. So that's quite good in that it's giving you an answer, but it's also providing you with very concrete citation. Now, on the other side, one of the big worries we have with AI is just interpretability. What we see often is AI can now produce numbers, but we don't really understand where they came from. This is certainly an issue when you'll see in a lot of nowcasting models. Years ago, we used to use dynamic factor modeling, and they were reasonably easy to interpret. But now, as we've moved to neural pathway models or neural network models, we often get better answers, but we don't fully understand how to interpret that answer. We don't understand how it was constructed as clearly. And that's one of the issues for official statistics that's very problematic, because our job isn't just to give you a number, it's to give you a number with context, and we need to be able to explain where that number comes from and what it means. And if we're using artificial intelligence, we need to make sure that we understand what that intelligence has done and how it's manufactured that answer. And that isn't always so easy.
Yeah, the quality of the data and information and the statistics that official statistics are providing for the public is very important. And we have also a project here about the AI agents that they can help us to understand the quality of the outputs that we are providing, but it should be trained somehow based on some local data sets or the samples that we already have from our previous providing information or those kind of reports, to have a specific or tailor-made chatbot, as you mentioned. And that is very important, that all the process be clear for everyone, especially for authorities, because they always ask about the public interest, about the clear model that we are using to make the decisions, and what were the main variables or concepts that lead us to that decision. So they want to know everything is clear and they are comply with the regulations that we have in different areas. And that's very important concept. But the future direction is to use this kind of technologies to make a global impact. And you have been leading as a board member and advisor of ISLP, the Statistical Literacy Project, for many years. I remember at least from 2005 that I joined the ISLP. So I would like to ask you, how do you see the field of data literacy and statistical literacy evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? What advice would you give to educators like us that we are teaching at the universities, and data scientists who want to promote data literacy and statistical literacy in their communication?
Oh, well, that's a huge question. So where to begin? Let me start with the easy part, which is if I was giving advice to universities, I think personally we need to broaden out statistics courses. So I think in universities we've been very good at teaching statistics as like a science, you know, so we equip students with all sorts of tools. But I don't think they leave university with any sense of some of the wider discussions that are underway in the world. So, for example, you know, with the emergence of data science and big data, we've also had this kind of philosophical discussion about, you know, theory is dead. The correlation is enough. We don't really need a theory anymore. I mean, that's a profound shift in thinking. And I think that needs to be discussed from a philosophical point of view, not just a technical point of view. There's other issues, like I said, there's the normative function of statistics and its dual role. So it not only measures the economy and society, but it also shapes the debate. And I'm not sure people fully understand the power of words. So it's back to that question you asked me earlier. Again, you know, there's a huge responsibility for statisticians, but I think it's very important that students in college start engaging and thinking about that, thinking about the conceptual frameworks that shape the narratives that they see every day in the news and the media. You know, there's so many things that are so exciting going on in the statistical world. The whole evolution of data, I mean, even the concept of data itself. When I joined the statistics office in 1993, really data was, you know, the classic rows and columns of numbers. But after the digital revolution, it's sound, it's text, you know, everything is data. And again, there's been very little discussion about what does that mean? How was that shaped? The conceptualization within our profession. What has it done to our profession? So I think there's a lot of really interesting sociological and philosophical discussions that should be added in to a statistics or a data science course, not just the more technical mathematical operations piece. So that's one thing. I mean, more broadly, from what if you look at PIAC and PISA results, which are two of the big OECD surveys, it would appear that our literacy generally, not just statistical literacy, but literacy in general, is declining. That our ability, our faculty with words, like our average vocabulary size is diminishing. Our ability to grapple with some of the concepts that we should, that they're day-to-day issues, but more and more people, it seems, are struggling with them. And I don't know what the cause of that is. I don't know, is it we're not reading enough, maybe? I don't know. It's easy to come up with causes, but I mean, I think this is worthy of investigation, because I think that is leading to some of the frustration that we see around the world, where people don't really understand what's going on anymore. They don't understand the world they live in. And then they apply very localized, maybe simplistic kind of models in their head to interpret what's happening. And I think that is problematic. I think there's a level of sophistication that we're maybe starting to lose. The other power of statistical literacy, in theory, or you would hope, is that data could provide a neutral space in discussion. So if I'm discussing something with you, we may not agree, but if we can agree on the number at least, then that's a hugely important step, because then at least we agree that unemployment is 100,000. The diagnosis of that problem, the policy prescriptions may be different, but at least we can agree on the extent of the problem that we're trying to solve. What I see now with all of the misinformation, fueled partly by AI, but for other reasons too, is that in a lot of cases we can't even agree on the number anymore. And that's very problematic, because it means our ability to agree is diminishing, and people's trust and their confusion, their trust diminishes, but their confusion increases, because they're not sure who to believe. They don't know what to believe. And that's all leading to, I think, some of the problems that we're seeing in society today. So the role of statistical literacy in our lives, I mean, it's not a nice to have. I mean, this is of profound importance to the future of kind of functioning societies, functioning democracies, functioning political systems. We have to be able to engage with each other in a kind of a constructive and productive way. And if we can't agree on numbers, if we can't agree on the extent of problems, we will certainly never agree on the solution.
Yeah, the rule of the statistics, the traditional rule was proving the hypothesis, right? The different ideas of the people, or even the scientists, that they want to approve some hypothesis. So using the statistical test and hypothesis test, for example, is a tradition in statistics that we know for many years. And using the data and the statistics to get to a point that everybody agree that is true, or at least with the probability we can say that the likelihood of this is much more than the other. So maybe we can agree with this one and leave the other. So that was a way to make an agreement in the concepts, especially in the social sciences, that everybody can have different ideas and all these ideas might be correct. So we need a tool to check it, but by these new technologies and the data and the revolution that we have in artificial intelligence, we have the different risks that they arise with these new technologies. Even for machine learning algorithms, nowadays we have the model risk. It is the new risks that are coming from our models that we are applying to solve the different problems. So these are the new concepts that we have to think about it. And as you said, in the next 5 to 10 years, it might be the very hot topic for the specialists to talk about this kind of concept and how they can solve this or get advantage of the new technologies in a right way. But before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Perhaps an emerging trend, a recent project, or a thought you believe would be important to know for our audience to take away?
Wow. Well, I guess, I mean, from where I sit at the moment at the OECD, what we're starting to see is not so much new issues, but the re-emergence of old issues. So, for example, for a long time, trade had kind of disappeared off the economic agenda. You know, free trade was kind of the established norm. People had kind of lost interest in trade statistics to some extent. All of a sudden, we see a massive surge now in interest in trade statistics, in balance of payment statistics, the implications of tariffs, how merchandise and services trade interact with each other. And again, back to statistical literacy, what we see generally is a massive amount of ignorance around what the statistics are saying and the interpretation of those statistics. So we're seeing several administrations producing rather peculiar derived numbers from those statistics that don't really stand up to any scrutiny. They don't make any sense. So again, we see the danger of poor statistical literacy feeding directly into policy implications where countries are adopting, I mean, very harmful and what would appear to be kind of quite self-destructive policy decisions based on very poor interpretation of statistics. So I think it's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see the re-emergence of trade statistics, which, like I said, had kind of become a bit of a backwater for statistics offices in recent years because it was a very calm area. Now all of a sudden they're back in the spotlight. Everybody wants trade statistics. Everybody wants balance payment statistics again.
Okay, thank you so much, Asif, for your time and for your insights that you shared with us. I'm sure that it would be very interesting to know about these points for our community, for the students. So thank you for joining us and sharing this insight with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Afshin. It's great to see you again.